Guys, it's just rustic packaging with green leaves and eco labels on it is out. We need a new plan. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Gita Marie and we are going to be talking about a very specific type of greenwashing today. One that you might have seen but not been aware of. I think this is a very important conversation to have because, you know, when it comes to being a conscious consumer, knowing the strategies, the methods, the tools with which companies are trying to make us feel okay about buying stuff is pretty nifty. In the toolbox we need as a mindful consumer, one of the things that's really important to have, the skill that is important to master, is learning how to decode certain types of advertising, marketing strategies, and just generally how a lot of companies communicate. Which is why I wanted to sit down and make this video, because this has been bothering me for a hot second. So, without further ado, we have talked about greenwashing on this channel quite a few times. I have a playlist and specific videos, but let me just recap. Greenwashing is when a company, a corporation, a brand is misleading consumers into thinking that their products or their services or their actions are more environmentally conscious, sustainable, mindful than they actually are. That is what greenwashing is all about. There are a few different ways of doing this. Some of them are significantly more obvious than others. And I have tried to categorize the different kinds of greenwashing in this video. So if you're interested in learning more about the different variations, I suggest you watch that. It's a little bit old, but I stand by everything I say in this video. Now, I don't know what to call this variation of greenwashing. Empowerment washing? I don't know, it's a variation of social greenwashing. If you have better ideas on what to call this, let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, what I'm trying to explain is that sometimes a company will try to mislead consumers into thinking, into believing that the actions of the company or the corporation are serving the community or serving people to an extent that is just untrue. They're trying to tell us that they're doing good for a community, that they're doing good for people, more so than their competitors are. Aha. Does that make sense? If not, it is going to make sense in a second, I promise you. The small farm on the hill and people happily running through the meadow extends from greenwashing into this variation, social greenwashing, where even billion-dollar corporations are presented as a family-owned business where everyone is just thriving and having a good time. Imagine. Now, I think a lot of consumers are starting to catch on to greenwashing, even subconsciously so, because it's so obvious and so superficial. A lot of consumers are starting to catch on. They're starting to see the switches in colors from the reds, the yellows, the blues into a green color spectrum. McDonald's being the absolute most obvious example here. We're also pretty tired of useless and meaningless leaves and branches and natural imagery on packaging. This is what I, in my first video about greenwashing, is calling direct greenwashing, because it's a very straightforward way of lying about impact. And the thing is, when the first company started doing it, it was extremely effective. Now every major corporation is in constant battle with other major corporations about who can have the most eco-friendly packaging without actually lifting a finger. So in the beginning, this was really effective because no one really talked about sustainability like that before. But when everyone is doing it, it's not as effective. So more and more consumers started to catch on, and I'm sure it is still effective to some extent, but I'm also pretty sure it's a lot less effective, either because people are catching on or because people are just straight up tired about hearing about sustainability when they're not seeking out something about sustainability. Is anyone who is not researching for a greenwashing video for YouTube actually reading what it says on this type of packaging? And because consumers are not reacting in the same way as they used to, we have to move on and find a new way of communicating the fact that we are better without actually being better, but you know, like we have to just like cement the vibe that we're better. Then it doesn't actually matter who's the best. Anyway, so the corporations have replaced sustainable with responsible, but it's the same bullshit. Because just like you don't need any proof when you say that your product or your service is sustainable or eco-friendly or planet-friendly or tomorrow-friendly or whatever variations of this, you don't need any proof or certification to say that your product is responsible. I would like to point out, however, that as per January 2024, there is EU legislation that is targeting this type of behavior, that are targeting greenwashing, which means that you will have to increasingly be able to show proof and evidence that your product is actually more sustainable. You have to show documentation whenever you make claims like this. And sure, there are lots of companies that are still not complying with this legislation, and a lot of companies are starting to really get their fingers in the mailbox, which is not an English expression, I realize, it's a Danish expression. Either way, an increasing amount of legal action is taken against companies with advertising and marketing strategies like this. And you know, instead of actually improving the supply chain, which is expensive and not fun, it's just easier to find new words to use that describe the same vague idea. Because calling your product responsible serves the exact same purpose and has the exact same angle as calling your product eco-friendly. And when it's not talked about, when it's not explored and criticized, it's really effective. Now, this is not to say that there aren't any family-owned businesses that are great to support. This is not to say that there aren't any small-scale companies that care about community, that care about people. There are. It's just to say that when we see initial advertising, it's important to ask why, how, where, and just look twice, because the same language that's used to describe actual good companies is also taken by companies that just prefer to do the very bare minimum, to change as little as they possibly can in their big enterprise, meanwhile also taking consumers away from the actual small-scale good companies. So this is not to say that there aren't any companies that are actually legit, that are actually caring, that are actually serving a community, because there are. We have to be a little bit extra alert. Which brings me to my next point, which is family-owned businesses, or rather, family-owned businesses. We as consumers would much rather buy from a family-owned business rather than a big billion-dollar corporation. Overall. And now I'm painting with the pretty wide brush here, because I know that that's not always the case. And Temu is having a field day, so obviously a lot of consumers also don't give a rat's ass about whether or not they're supporting a small company or a billion-dollar corporation. Either way, I would like to think that a lot of people do actually care. And this is not only based on my own feelings, but when you see billion-dollar corporations adapting this type of language, we can deduct that it's because it's effective. So one example I would like to bring up now is Coca-Cola. I talk about them in basically every greenwashing video, and it is because they are the world champions. So Coca-Cola is pretty notorious for buying up small companies, actually family-owned or just simply smaller companies, and including them into their enterprise. This is pretty standard business behavior, and Coca-Cola has been doing this for a while. If you go on their website, you can see a lot of very familiar and some unfamiliar companies that are actually also owned by Coca-Cola. And every time I talk about this, both online as well as with friends and family and people in my network, a lot of people are surprised when I mention some of the companies that are actually owned by Coca-Cola, because they don't necessarily advertise the fact that they are owned by Coca-Cola conveniently. So Coca-Cola tends to buy up small companies, but they keep the entire family-owned business, smaller business identity, visual identity, as well as their communicative style intact. And that is a very intentional action, I believe. Sometimes you have to look really hard on the packaging to find the proof that Coca-Cola actually owns this company. Sometimes you even have to go on their website. One really good example I love bringing up here is Innocent Smoothies. So I was under the impression for a really long time that Innocent Smoothies was a smaller British brand. They had a very down-to-earth vibe, and I had to look really closely to see that they are in fact also owned by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola bought 20% 20 years ago, and then they have steadily been buying out more and more. Now they are the sole owner of Innocent Smoothies. But there are no logos and there are no visual identity that makes it clear that this is owned by Coca-Cola. They are very clearly a separate brand owned by the same entity. And this happens all the time. And I see this as problematic because as a consumer, you would like to know who you're supporting. When you're paying money for something, you would like to know where your money ends up. At least that's the case for many consumers. I cannot speak for everyone. Again, tons of people don't really seem to care, but you clicked on this video, so I assume you care a little bit as well. So when it's not obvious where your money ends up, I have a problem with it. And I think there are several reasons as to why the big corporations are not advertising more thoroughly that they actually own the smaller businesses. I assume that obviously it is its own company in its own right, that have a separate communication style, visual identity, etc. from the main brand. That is an aspect of it as well. But I think there is a bigger marketing issue here. When we focus on the fact that something is a small, family-owned, cute business, we automatically separate them from a lot of the very problematic things bigger corporations are responsible for, because small family-owned businesses aren't global polluters. Small family-owned businesses don't have slave labor allegations against them. So whenever a big story about one of these major corporations breaks into the press, it automatically separates the big corporation from what's happening over here, which means that sales aren't really affected. So they keep making the same amount of money. That's very neat. Anyway, glass half empty kind of day. Sorry about that. So call me crazy here, but I think it's very important that consumers know who they're supporting. And these types of strategies make that increasingly difficult on purpose. Now, I know this issue or this strategy isn't exactly new, but the frequency with which this angle is used is new. Or it's increasing, at least. We feel a lot more comfortable buying from a company or buying a product if we feel that that product has a positive impact, especially because pollution, unethical labor practices, depletion of resources, and how shit big billion-dollar corporations actually are is talked about in the press, on social media, increasingly so. Human rights and exploitation issues as well. So more and more consumers are becoming aware, which means that even a fragile promise that this is not the case with this product, or that these topics are not an issue in this company, is beneficial to that company. And I have one final thing to talk about, and it's the, well, this company is female-led, you go girl, girl boss angle. I think this is my least favorite one. I'm gesturing a lot with my hands now, that sort of happens. Deal with it. Because it falls into this aspect of advertising where feminism, minority issues, diversity problems are hollowed out to sell us something. Also, I was never really a fan of any company setting the bar or determining how we discuss issues like this, which are so deeply cultural and deeply political. And when we let companies steer the conversation, we often end up talking about it from the perspective that benefits the company and not the world. So yeah, this bothers me a lot. Hold on. You can disagree with me on this one. Actually, leave your comments down below. I would love to chat about this. But when you use diversity issues, minority problems, and feminism in your advertising, we end up having this huge part of the population whose primary understanding of these issues comes from how we talk about them in advertising. And that is such a vast misrepresentation. An example that I don't think I've talked about on my channel, but that I think about constantly, is Rihanna's brand Savage X Fenty, because their advertising is very large on diversity and empowerment, and there is often this focus on the fact that it's female-led, it's female-owned, and that it's supposed to lift women up. Meanwhile, their labor practices are awful. The brand has taken 0 steps in terms of ethical labor practices. They're still using sweatshops. The vast majority of garment workers in sweatshops are women. So when we're talking about lifting women up, it's primarily women who can afford to buy the products and not so much women in the supply chains that makes the products. I don't know how that doesn't taste bad in everyone's mouths. There truly isn't a social justice cause that billionaires won't exploit for profit. What I want you to take away from this video is whenever you're faced with any kind of claim, that being vague wording, like we're a responsible, tomorrow-friendly brand, or more specific claims like they care about community or that they're people-driven, whatever the fuck that means. Ask why, ask how, ask who makes their products, ask how much product they make. Any kind of claim should always be met with a question. I think we should treat the responsibility lingo with the same scrutiny that we do sustainability, which luckily is happening a little bit. But when we only focus on greenwashing from this green leaves on packaging kind of angle, we often miss a lot of this other very vague language that ultimately also affects our perception and association of products and brands. So that is just as important. I hope that you liked this video. If you did, leave me a thumbs up, that would make my day. Also, let me know what you think down below in the comments. I'm always working on my greenwashing series, so tag me, DM me if you have any other examples that we can use in a future episode. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day, and I will see you guys next time. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then, bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green, zero-waste content, and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!